visiting every museum and gallery. While a fibers and crafts major at Philadelphia College of Art, which is now the University of the Arts, she became fascinated by the relationship between maps and the land they represent, embarking on a lifelong interest in landscape and topography. After emigrating to Israel, Anna worked as a textile conservator in Haifa and Tel Aviv. She studied at the Textile Conservation Center, Courtauld Institute in London, where she received a postgraduate diploma in textile conservation. Back in the US, Anna worked in freelance in conservation for a textile museum in Washington, DC, and many museum clients as a freelance textile conservator. At the same time, she continued to construct collage landscapes with scientific, political, and metaphysical significance, depicting 3 or more dimensions on a 2-dimensional plane. Anna now lives in Baltimore and has 2 adult sons. Her work has been exhibited at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, the Maryland Governor's Mansion, and the Israeli Embassy, and is in the permanent collection of the Haifa Museum of Art and the Beersheba Biblical Museum. She was awarded prize for the encouragement of young artists for work exhibited in the Artist's House in Jerusalem, and received a Maryland State Art Council grant for individual artists in 2008 and 2016.
And now 2021.
And 2021. Amazing. Congratulations. Welcome, Anna. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. It's lovely to be here. You can interrupt and tell me because of English if I'm going too fast, please. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you're Dominica because your thing says Joanna.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay, that makes sense. So I was telling her, we talked for a moment, we did our tech run through, and it's just so, it's such a great, like, positive side of the quarantine, because we're reaching out globally to share our art. And I found this call for art, and because it was a subject matter that was relevant to my work, I answered the call. And I was really glad it was legitimate, because there were so many virtual things happening. It was hard to know from some link on Instagram what it was going to end up being. And I'm very pleased with this result. I love Dominica's essay she wrote on the website, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And I also was in your beautiful city in Warsaw not long before COVID hit. And I hope to come back, because I was really just in the airport, but I did have pierogies and some good lager. Okay. I'm going to share my screen and just start talking. I actually realized sorry about the phone. Wait, I'm going to turn it off. So sorry. Of course, I never get a phone call. So I'm going to share my screen and just start talking. I realize I don't think I have a full overview of the collage that's in the show, but I have a lot of details, and I'm going to use that as my introduction to talk about this whole idea and show other work that's relevant. So, okay, this is working. You can all see it. All right. So the collage that's in the show, that's called, is everybody hearing me okay? Okay, that's called Anthropocene on the Prairie, was made of maps of geological timescales. What happened was I was reading a book about how to clone a mammoth. And at the same time, this past August, I was, I haven't started the slideshow, just a minute, sorry. Okay, So I was visiting relatives in Boulder, Colorado, which is the foothills of the Rockies, you know, the great mountain range in the west of the United States, but it's really also the edge of the prairie. And what you see around you is mostly prairie landscape. And you know, as a child, I used to remember that there was this vast area of prairie in between Denver, which is the main city, and Boulder, which is about, you know, less than an hour's drive away where the university is. And there used to be all prairie dogs roaming the landscape and all this. And I was reading about mammoths and mastodons, and this is the part of the country where it's very logical to go digging and actually find bones from these animals. So, oh, how do I get that out of there? How come this isn't? You know what? This isn't going full screen for some reason. Sorry about that. So you know what? I'll just try to keep talking through and hopefully this will resolve. So this image you see here is of genetic mapping, and I was looking at the perspective of it, and it reminded me of like fences on the grassland. So I incorporated this into the collage. I'm gonna figure this out. Sorry about this, just a minute. I don't know why it's not going full screen. I'm so sorry about this.
Don't worry, it's totally fine.
It's like got one image on top of the other instead of being in slideshow mode. So I'm gonna try to get it back to the slideshow. 1 second.
Also, your video is off right now?
Oh. Wait, here. All right. Was my video off when I was showing the images?
It turned off at some point.
Oh, all right. Okay, maybe that'll resolve it. All right. So are you seeing the screen now? No, it's not on share screen. Sorry. All right, so I started thinking, it's still not, wait a minute. View, slideshow. Okay. So now this one down here is a close-up of how I use the geological timescale charts to actually use it to represent the mountains that were around me while I was in Colorado. See, it's still not the right view. So down here at the bottom, all in here, you can see how I used those lines from the genetic mapping to make fence, which is part of what you see on the prairie. I was thinking a lot about all the human elements that exist that you interact with on the prairie. So that's what, they have fencing, and then these blue elements are actually photovoltaic panels, solar panels, because in the American West, you see a lot of solar fields and solar panels. So this is a detail of the collage, and I took a picture of it with dramatic light to get that dimensional effect of cicada wings. And so I have to jump a little bit because the whole collage is a statement about man's intervention into the pristine prairie. And when I was researching about this collage, and looking at a lot of images, I found this photograph from National Geographic where this guy had taken a photograph of all these helicopters. There's part of the Grand Canyon that I believe it's called sort of cynically Helicopter Alley, because you go there and it's full of helicopters from other tourists. So I thought of it as a play, like cicadas or locusts. And so I took an image of a helicopter, and for the rotors, the blades that make it fly, these are cicada wings. But you can't tell from a flat JPEG that there's actually some dimension to it. So this light adds a dimension. This isn't the way you would actually see it for real, but I just think it's fun photographically that you can play with your work in this way. So now I'm going to jump a minute. Though that was example and a very, very brief explanation of the collage that I was working on when I was thinking about mammoths and all that, which is going to come up again later in my work. But now I'm going to start talking more about like a larger body of work that was started, and this was one of the original inspirations. And then you're going to see a bunch more images of what I'm working on now. So all of this area, these are like chimeric beasts. That means it's a made up composite of different animals. It's obviously something that doesn't exist. And this is the bottom. It's like a frieze of a collage. It's a detail of a series I was making about tulip mania. And it's sort of a taking off on a illustration from the 1600s of the garden, where the first tulip garden in Holland. So I was really, really intrigued by just this combination of animal parts. And I was like, this is really fun. I have to keep working on this. So I morphed it into a long series that's ongoing, that's about cabinets of curiosity. And if you're familiar, I'll just say really briefly, because I've been doing a huge amount of research on this subject. This is annoying me that you can't see the whole image still. I'm still going to try to fix this. Just a second. You know what? I've just got to keep talking. I'm going to try to not let this bother me. So I started working on this whole series based on Cabinet of Curiosity. And a Cabinet of Curiosity is these cabinets where men who thought they were aristocratic, and a lot of people really with titles, you know, got involved in this, where they would have relics of maybe things that were brought back on ships, because this was the age of exploration. And there would be, like, you know, bones of animals, and sometimes these things were made up and invented and weren't even real. But this sort of advanced scientific discovery by having these cabinets, and they're the precursors to museums, especially natural history museums. So these people had these cabinets, and, you know, everybody would come, and it showed how intelligent the person was who had all these things. So I started thinking, okay, I want to riff on this, you know, sort of use this as my jumping off point. How do I make this a 21st century iteration of this idea? And I realized that instead of us showing specimens that are brought to our part of the world for the first time, we have to, as man, help save these species. So this was almost the first one. This is a collage. It's a watercolor with collage. It's called Compensation for Loss. And that concept is borrowed from conservation, because when you're conserving an artifact, you know, in my case, a textile, the part that's missing, you fill in as if you're compensating for loss. I took this concept and where's my slideshow to make this move? Sorry for the technical. There we go. Yay. Okay, but now it's not in slideshow mode. Okay, so this is a close-up here. You can see how I used pieces of, it was just I just do searches on Google to find imagery that suits what I need. So these were Delft tiles with images of turtles on them. So it's sort of like this turtle shell cracked and people had to find something to fix it. So they found these tiles, and you know, to take it even further, the images on the tiles are turtle shells. The next one, come on, come up. Oh, sorry. Now I figured out how to do this. So this one is called Armored Winged Insect. It looks very like Japanese to me. It reminds me of samurai type imagery. And the idea is the insect needs armor to protect it. This one, oops. This one is called hashtag Dodo Bird Lives Should Have Mattered. And the dodo bird, which lived in Mauritius for like 100 years, was killed off. Everybody thinks it's because of the explorers that came there, but really it was the rats and dogs and cats that the explorers brought with it that killed off the dodo bird. I guess the rats would eat the eggs. But the idea is the dodo bird is a universal symbol of extinction, of species extinction. And because where the dodo bird lived, it was a flightless bird. It had no real predators and it lived very peacefully until European explorers arrived on the island. So I created this flying apparatus. These are like, it actually has some dimension. This is a balloon and these are strings that attach it to protect the dodo bird. And I like, you know, this is a watercolor of a skeleton of a dodo bird. And I made this like cage-like structure to expand the amount of skeletal structure it would have to support the wings that are supported by the balloon. Here we have, go back. Oh wait, I go forward. This one is called, sorry that it's flipping around like this. It's called Maasai Shields for a Pangolin. Pangolins were implicated in COVID-19 early on. They thought that it started from bats and went to pangolins. And there's Asian pangolins and there's African pangolins. So I knew that I had to do something for this poor pangolin. So I was looking at African shields because the animal itself is the only creature that's fully covered in scales. And it just reminded me a little bit of shields. And I started researching what the shields would look like in the part of Africa where the pangolin is, you know, runs wild. And this part down here represents what a pangolin looks like when it gets all curled up into a little ball. It like looks like a big pine cone, basically. So it's that's the protection for the pangolin. And what's really interesting to me also is I think it's very obvious that the Maasai shield decoration is inspired by the pangolin. So I love that back and forth with the decorative influence. And here we have a close-up of the of what it looks like with the pieces of the shields as like sort of the armor for the pangolin when it's not rolled up. This piece is called Shooting Gallery. Well, sorry, I keep moving it. And it's about the passenger pigeon. the passenger pigeon in the United States in the 1800s was so plentiful that people would go out and shoot literally thousands of them at a time. And they're extinct. The last one was famous. It was in a zoo in Cincinnati. And like, I think around 1912, her name was Martha, named after the First Lady of the United States, George Washington's wife. And one day, just in the middle of the afternoon, when children were visiting the zoo, she was like dead in the cage, and they put her body on the train and like expedited her before Amazon. They sent her to the Smithsonian, and she's still there. So anyway, you can read first-person accounts of what the shooting was like. There were so many, they completely blackened the sky. So up here I have like a dark sky, and like this, people would go out and shoot like thousands at a time before breakfast and put them in baskets and ship them to restaurants in like Chicago and New York, and they were a delicacy. So I was looking at all these illustrations of them, and I was thinking about how the illustrations now are more valuable and precious than the bird ever was. So I put the bird, some of the illustrations in cages, but you can see, like, I don't think I can make it bigger, but, and there's a close-up of this on my website, but there's gunshot holes. There's holes in these illustrations. And there's like holes in the illustrations, some of them, the ones that are in the cages, but there were so many of them on trees when they would fly through that they actually broke the limbs on the trees because thousands of them would gather in one place. And they were actually prevalent in the part of the United States where I grew up in Indiana. After I lived in Colorado, we moved a little bit further east to Indiana. And when I was a little girl, I would hear shooting in the distance, especially like on Sundays. And people would tell me that that was skeet shooting, which is clay pigeons. It's like this machine that shoots something up in the sky for men to come and shoot it. But I realized after reading all these first-person accounts that these were probably easily grandchildren of people that would have been out there shooting the real thing. It's like completely amazing to read these stories about it. There's a lot written about this. So these are the, what I do a lot is I copy period illustrations so that all the copies I'm using in my collage are actually my own imagery that I just, after I make them, I can print them and manipulate them and use them in the collage. So these are some of my illustrations of the pigeons, and they're really beautiful. Okay, so now we're getting back into the mastodon, which connects to the cabinets of curiosity. And then I have to say, I was perusing your website and I saw the link to the rewilding in the Carpathians. And I got really interested in the bison rewilding. And I've been reading a lot about this and all these, forays into this world. And I have to come and visit for one thing. And I'm vaccinated, so whenever I can come there, I will. But one of the funniest parts I read was the Europeans told the Americans, this was right like the beginning of the 19th century, that we had no megafauna in North America, which is like the funniest thing ever. So here's the derivation of me making these pictures of mastodons. So all this imagery that you saw of these things about man's destruction or help with species is slated to be exhibited in a space in Baltimore, which is called the Peel Center. And the Peel Center is the oldest purpose-built museum in the United States. And the Peels are very famous for being portrait painters. They were in Philadelphia and Baltimore. There was a father, and he named all his children after painters. So there's Rembrandt Peale and Titian Peale and all this. And okay, so they had this museum in Baltimore right around 1800. So the country was very young. And they started having their own version of a cabinet of curiosities. And, you know, they thought they were so smart, and they were showing all these relics, and they went and dug up a mastodon, which is like so funny. There's these beautiful pictures of their mastodon dig. And so I'm doing all this research on what was originally in their collection. So I'm doing my part to reinterpret a mastodon display, because a lot of this, some of the work that's going to be in this series is sort of about how this information gets presented in general, and it really ties into my work in museums. And here's a close-up of, so I've got a couple close-ups because I'm so proud of my mastodon watercolors. Where's the next one? Come on. Oh, where's it going? I don't know why it stopped. So weird. Oh, here we go. Okay. Oops. Now it goes back to the beginning. Nice. Sorry about all these deep technical. I always think I got this figured out, and somehow, wait a minute. We'll get there. Okay, so here's my mastodon. Really fun. It's going to get cut up. The original's going to get cut up into a collage. But what happens is, once I make these watercolors, like I said, I can use the digital copies and use them for all kinds of other things. Oh, okay, so I want to somehow use some DNA in this display with the mastodon, and you can't find very much because there really isn't any. This is what I learned about when I was reading how to clone a mammoth. All these people think you can clone a mammoth. You cannot clone a mammoth. There's not enough intact DNA. What you can do is take little tiny sequences of the gene of what they have and insert it into an Asian elephant. And they can start trying to give Asian elephants more characteristics of a mammoth. It has to be able to live in cold temperatures, and there's all these things that it has to be able to do. But but when I was doing my research, I came upon these, which I love because they look like the feet of a mastodon. So stay tuned. They're gonna come back to you. You're gonna see how I get these incorporated. So the collage, the one that I'm working on now, with the beautiful mastodon watercolor, that's going to be the central piece when you walk in the museum. And it's like the Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian has this huge elephant carcass when you walk in, and all the kids, it's just emblematic of that space. So this is a sketch. It's an in-progress collage. There's not that much done on it, but started thinking about a museum space post-COVID. And we know that all the windows have to be open. And, there's all this talk going on of how office spaces are going to be reinterpreted. And, the older the building, the better, because all this modern stuff is built so you can't open the windows. So this museum's going to have open windows, and it's going to be like reenacting the prairie where the mastodon could have been found. But it's sort of taking it even further. All these spaces are going to be filled in with this faux chinoiserie wallpaper that looks like beautiful trees and flowers and birds outside. But it's really going to be a comment on, is the future going to be great and this is really the outside, or is our only interaction going to be these idealized interpretations of what it used to look like outside? And is this really outside, or is it wallpaper in a space where the outside is not good. And all of this area is going to be like the Macedon will be in the middle, but it'll be like sort of a bunch of relics of the Anthropocene, like torn, like sort of like a geological strata of stuff that you would find that's the human layer. So like I say, stay tuned. And thank you so much for your time and attention. And I'm so sorry for my technical glitchiness.
Oh, don't worry at all. Like, it's been so insightful and so amazing. And I mean, I personally love the concept of the whole museum space, and like having all the windows open. Like you said, we're gonna have to rethink how all the public spaces and workspaces look like post-COVID. And like, but the windows are not actually open because you have the wallpaper there. And it makes me think of, like those sci-fi movies where they ride a bike, but they're riding in front of a screen that's moving and showing them the landscape, but it's
Right.
not actually, they're not actually outside.
Right.
So I really
That's
love
not science fiction. That's Peloton.
Yeah, exactly. That's Peloton. I mean,
Right.
it's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember, I think I was last year visiting friends in New York, and on the train I saw an ad about, like, it was some gym, like it was like one of the mirror gyms, and it was saying something about like the future of interaction. And it got me thinking about how, like, all those new technologies that are claiming to bring in more interaction into your life, they actually do it by removing the actual interaction that you have, which is a paradox in itself. But anyway, thank you so much for showing and walking us through your process. If
I've actually
anyone
made,
has,
sorry, go on. This is
if
hard.
anyone has any questions, now's the time for you to ask them. You can put them in the chat. Actually, we have one comment from Jenna. I don't know, Anna, if you can see the chat. I can also read it.
I don't like clicking back and forth. You can be the gatekeeper, be
course.
the curator. You're the curator.
Of course. Jenna says, Anna, I love the joy and enthusiasm you bring to your work. You're bringing hope to the Anthropocene, sharing your love for lost and maligned animals. I 100% agree. Oh my God, I 100% agree.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I have so many new ideas. Another image that I was looking at when I was in Colorado, and my cousin is here, who's like, I was in his home while I was working. Hi, Josh. Anyway, there was an image of a dead deer by the wall, that Trump's wall, because it couldn't get to where it needed to go, and it died of probably dehydration. So unfortunately, I'm going to make a picture that's going to somehow interpret that. But one thing I wanted to say, this idea of the museum, at first when I started working on the Mastodon, and I knew it was going to be like the centerpiece of my version of a cabinet of curiosity, because when these things were around, sometimes they took up entire room. They covered every surface possible with artifacts. And there's a space in Baltimore, actually, at the Walters, that they have a Wunderkammer, or Wunderzimmer. And they're reopening in a couple of days, so I can go back. But so when I thought about, if I'm going to make a collage, I'm like, yeah, okay, I could do my own take on what those rooms would have looked like. But I'm always trying to push it further. I always have to bring something new to it. So even though my artifacts would be completely made up, like you saw those collage piece things, I'm like, no, just do something else. So there's been a lot of talk, like you said, about what these spaces are going to be like going forward. And I thought I can just make it this whole commentary on the way that natural history is presented. whether you go to a dig site or you go to a natural history museum. And when I was actually in Boulder and sketching, I did go visit the Natural History Museum in Denver. And when I visit these museums now, I'm really examining the way they present everything. I was in Paris at that museum. I was in Berlin. And when I come to Warsaw, I'm sure you have your own. Do you have like big animals mounted in Warsaw?
I don't think so. There's the ethnography museum, but I don't think they have any animals on display. Kind of because like when you're talking about the Natural History Museum, the first thing that comes to my mind is the Natural History Museum in New York,
Right.
Which is all essentially just taxidermy. But I don't think we have a museum quite like it. They're slightly different. I need to look into it actually, because I never thought of it before. But I'll look into it.
Have you visited the rewilding? Have you gone to the Carpathian and seen the bison?
No, I have not. But actually, we have in plans we're planning to go to the Puszcza Białowieska, which is like one of the national parks in Poland. The one where they're trying to cut down the trees, but it's one of the like national treasures. So there's this whole thing with it. We're gonna be shooting a film there, so soon.
Nice.
But it's also like really interesting in terms of like animal migration and like the species that live there that are just there, because the flora and fauna are really unique to that place. But actually, speaking of museums, I don't know if you know this one, but with the Cabinet of Curiosities in New York, there was a museum called the Morbid Anatomy Museum that was really inspired by, I'm pretty sure it actually shut down in 2016, I think. But I'm sure you can still find online some images from there.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'll check that out. There's the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia that, even though I went to art school, I haven't visited yet. So that's a space that I want to visit. What's interesting to me is whenever Europeans, especially like I've been around Poles, and when they come to the United States, they're amazed at how much we have just like animals running around. When you're in Central Park, I swear, every time people stop to look at the squirrels, you can be reassured they're European.
Well, the squirrels are also different color. The squirrels are also different color, because in Poland, like in Warsaw parks, like the squirrels are orange, whereas in Central Park, their squirrels are gray or black. So I remember that being shocked by that. But actually, I think I don't remember which ones, but one are more predatory. I just don't remember which ones, but there is a difference there. So it's just like a totally different, it's not the same squirrel.
Oh, right. But I know people really do appreciate the United States because we do still have so much wildlife. And like I said, the prairie and, which is not pristine anymore. Actually, the collage that's in this show, that's the part that, everybody can see is the top part, because there was a lot of space on the bottom that I cut off that had prairie dog burrows. And it was sort of like, they were like enhanced and being structured by humans in the way that I made the collage. But for somehow visually, I didn't like the way it all went together. I was just really struggling with it. So I cut that part off because I thought it was too much information at the same time. So, I'm still going to work more on prairie dogs, which is fascinating. And what was really interesting to me while I was in Boulder is that prairie dogs are in the newspaper. like these issues of how, whether you should do anything to eradicate them or let them be, are very important issues out there, because as far as I could understand, and if Josh wants to speak, we can let him weigh in more. They're actually good for the land because they churn everything up, and that enhances diversity of what can grow on the prairie. And it's always this issue between environmentalists and the farmers and ranchers' rights in the West. It's not just the prairie dogs. So they always have to keep saying that there's this one space where they're going to let the prairie dogs be, sort of like what they did to the Native Americans. Yes, you could say. So there would be actual headlines in the paper in Boulder about the prairie dogs. At the same time in Baltimore, there'd be some headline about, these houses collapsed, or like there was like a fire that spread from one row house to the other. I'm like, okay, in Boulder, we're reading about prairie dogs.
I mean, that actually reminds me of recently there's been a lot of controversy about wolves in the south of Poland, about how they're coming up to, like to villages and like bothering people, and like we should do something about it, but like actually we're taking away their land constantly. So like where are they supposed to go? Anyway, we do have some questions. Right. So I'm just going to read it. Hi, Anna. Thank you for showing us this great work. I'm curious about how being a conservator led you to collecting these lost animals and various elements of protection or sort of creative enhancements together.
That's an interesting question. Right. Yeah. I thank you for that question, because I actually wrote a couple notes, and I was going to say in the beginning, in the intro, that it doesn't answer it directly. I can try to answer directly, but when I was studying conservation, and by the way, the school is the Courtauld, but anyway, whatever. We learned about what conditions in the ground are favorable to preserving artifacts, because you start wondering, okay, these things survived in Egypt, we get that, but then how come they survived in bogs in Northern Europe? And those are very, very different conditions. So we learned a lot about that. So that it interested me. Like there's actually a word, I think it's taphonomy, which is the science of what happens to something when it's buried until it's excavated and brought out for people to loot it or whatever. No, I'm kidding. So I also worked in museums, and the museum I worked on in Tel Aviv had an active dig, which is called the Tel. The Tel is like layers of civilization, where there'd be this spot where all these different civilizations built on the same spot. So anyway, I was involved in archaeological digs. I was working as a textile conservator, but it was all hands on deck when the digging season was going on. So I've been interested in those types of things. And then when I started to try to answer the question about how that relates to my idea of man, like bolstering these specimens, it all just sort of tied into this concept of that we're no longer discovering these things for the first time. So what is man's role now? And then to take it further, obviously the next thing is outer space. Very obvious, we're wrapped up in knowing what they're bringing back, and these tiny signs of life. So I'm gonna have to, of course, incorporate some fake space rocks into this exhibition.
That's amazing. There's another question, also from Olivia. Are there other areas in the US you would be interpreting and collaging together like you did in Colorado, like maybe West Virginia?
I actually had an idea to make something about West Virginia with the mountaintop removal. just saying those words, just like, it's so fascinating. I read a book by Jonathan Franzen where it was all about like the fracking and all that in West Virginia. And I just kept thinking about mountaintop removal, but it hasn't coalesced. I don't make a piece specifically, like, I don't say like, oh, I have to make something about Colorado now. It all has a lot of different ideas have to come together in one to give me a lot of information to make it interesting for me.
That makes sense. I mean, it all connects, right? And you never know when it's gonna lead you when you first start.
Exactly. Very, very wise, right? It's the fun journey along the way.
Yep. Do we have any more questions? Oh, Olivia says that she's from West Virginia, so she was curious since you mentioned the wildlife in the US.
Oh, right. Yeah, I mean, I have to do a little bit more exploration. They did just clone a ferret. Some sort of ferret that's native to North America was just cloned.
Ooh.
So I want to look into that. And some of the collages in the series, I will include when I can find the genome of, you know, the way it's visualized. I do want to include it in some way, but I don't want to do it too much because it becomes just a gimmick and I don't like work that looks like, you know, she found this one thing and she's just doing it all the time. It has to be very intelligently done. Like the way I found those ones that look like the feet, that's like gold. When I find something like that, it's sort of like, did Google know that that I had to find it, that exact one?
That makes sense. I mean, you don't want, at least that's what I remember from design school. Like if when you make something and it reminds me of something else, you should keep working on it.
Right, exactly. It's
Yeah.
taking you somewhere. That's why I always say artists don't get ideas by, like, you know, sitting by the pool, you know, sipping, you know, martinis or whatever. It's like when you're working, you get an idea. That's what this whole series came from, that one little part of this whole series I did about Tulip Mania. And you can all check it out. It's on my website. And that was actually, if you don't mind me going off topic for a second to talk about that for a second.
Of course.
I actually found a geneticist who was the first person to sequence the tulip genome.
Okay.
And I got the raw data, and it hasn't been visualized. And I used the genome in my work. I made this collage that all looks like tulips, but it's just the ACTG and in black and white. So it's like, that really got me on a long path of learning a lot about genome. I mean, not like the way a scientist would learn.
Right, but now you have a deeper understanding of it, which takes you to a whole new level.
Exactly. But it's funny to me, when scientists do look at my work, they like expect me to have some level of understanding that's on their level. And it's like, dude, I made a picture. I liked it. I don't have to understand it. This is my way of understanding it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's very true. Everyone, I put Anna's website in the chat, so check it out. Her work is really interesting, and like you just saw, it has so many layers and so much detail goes into it. There's always something new you can find in it. Do we have any more questions, maybe? Oh, we do. So, beautiful pictures. Broken tree with pigeons touched me a lot. I think who visit this cabin of curiosities, who penetrates so sorry, analytically the layers and levels of time. Thank you. Yeah, the
That
one
was
with the pigeons was, I mean, it's so poetic and also heartbreaking at the same time that
Mhm.
you, like you said, the illustrations themselves are now way more valuable than the animal itself was at the time.
Mhm. And just the whole idea of shooting gallery, because that's a term that's really used. And so,
Yeah.
you know, to play on that was,
Yeah.
yeah. But what's interesting too is some of these pieces, they have some depth to them. And for the past year, I'm not alone in this. All this work that's been in exhibitions is virtual. So I have this collection of work that hasn't been framed. And you know, it's you're getting into another world when you have to have a shadow box frame.
Yeah.
And sometimes I like to have like very Baroque frames because I work with anachronisms. So, and I love these like ridiculously ornate frames. Which I can't find if they're shadow box, but I might have to start going back to working flat when I have to frame everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to do it, but I think there are ways to display digital work in frames. I mean, you know, in a digital setting.
Oh
It's,
yeah, oh yeah, that's true.
yeah.
Yeah, but I still very much appreciate the hand and the craft. I mean, my whole
Yeah.
background is craft, and when you look at these, they're, I mean, it sounds like bragging to say, but I put a lot of attention into the craft, and to me, that's part of the anachronisms of what I'm working on. Is it's really traditional in a sense. The concepts might not be, but it's a piece of art that you can buy,
Yeah,
and I aesthetics are extremely crucial to me.
I
And
agree.
there's too many times nowadays, especially in this realm of science art, where I feel like the artists are leaving the aesthetics at the door and
Mm,
when they enter the scientific sphere. And I say to myself, the scientists aren't abandoning the scientific method because they're working with an artist. And there's too many artists now who they're like, oh, look, this is like mold that I, you know, developed on paper. I'm like, okay, so what are you going to make with it? Like that, okay, big deal. Now do something with it. There's too much, it's like so process driven that they're
mm,
not using it to make something with it and tell us even more.
yeah, I mean, I find that I work in VR a little bit as well, and I find it that everyone gets so hung up on the fact that it's virtual. You know, it's virtual reality. I'm making something virtual reality. I'm like, okay,
Right.
that's a tool. How
Exactly.
are you going to use it in a unique way?
Hmm.
You know? So like, yeah, I get what you're saying.
That's exactly right. Like I knew
Yeah.
this guy who got a 3D printer. And he just kept making these little things. It's like, okay, so do something with it. You know, it's like, but I 3D printed it.
It's like, okay.
Right. Glad you understand that.
Yeah. It's it's one of those things that really bothers me about the digital art realm.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I personally, as an artist, I like to sit in between things. You know, I like to pull from different technologies and like mixing the virtual with the real and like
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
meshing them together
mhm.
because I find that way more interesting than just like, oh, I use this tool. I'm just like, okay, you know.
Right, right.
So yeah, I
And,
definitely understand that.
and like that's one thing that interests me. I realize, and I've been doing a lot of grant writing, and I had to write a bunch of essays recently, and it really makes me pull ideas together of what I'm working on. And this whole concept of these made up animals is like so perfect for collage,
Yeah.
you know. So I love that the way that the medium and the message, you know, can mesh sometimes. to propel both of them forward.
Yeah, absolutely. We have 3 minutes left. So if anyone has any last minute questions, now would be the time to put them in the chat. Yeah, this has been amazing. Like, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you, Anna. Thank you so much for taking the time.
I'm curious to know, what are things opening up for over there because of the vaccination, or?
So some of the museums and galleries opened back up in February, but and some, like, I think some cinemas are open, but for example, all dining is only takeout. So all restaurants are still closed and it's takeout only. So it's like, it's hard to tell because like some things are open, some things are closed, and it constantly changes. But yeah, so it kind of like reopens, but not really, but it's a lot of back and forth.
And are people pleased with the vaccine rollout, how it's going?
I think it depends who you ask, very much, because it's going significantly slower than I know it is going in the US, because I have some friends who already got vaccinated in the US, but none of my friends here have. And I remember I was talking to one of my friends who's an EMT, and she actually had to take her grandma to a completely different city for a vaccination because they had no spots in Warsaw. So it's a challenging situation, but we're managing.
Yeah. Well, like I say, it's so interesting what are good things from the pandemic. And like I said again, when we started, just this idea of connecting globally is so fascinating, because if you had this show and I knew I had work that was relevant and it was a real show, I'd be like, I can't afford to ship my work to Poland.
Yeah, I mean, we're an entirely virtual museum. Like, if it wasn't for the pandemic, we wouldn't actually exist,
Right.
Because actually our team is all over Poland. We never met in real life yet. We haven't met.
Oh, okay.
We've only been seeing each other on Zoom, which is interesting. But it works. And yeah.
That's great. So I hope I keep hearing about, what all your projects are. And, I follow you on social media, and everybody listening, follow me on Instagram. I'm a fine artiste. That's the French spelling of artist. You just put an E on the end of artist. So my maiden name is Fine. So I like playing on like fine art.
That's a great wordplay.
Listen, thank you so much. This has been a great pleasure. And one day, we'll be drinking beer together in Warsaw.
Yeah. Or in Baltimore, who knows?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's been amazing.
Take care. Be well.
You too. Yeah. Have a good night, everyone, or have a great day wherever you are.